And joining me now is Republican Representative Darren LaHood. Congressman, good to see you again. You had a busy week.
Yeah, good to be with you, Paul.
So Thursday, of course, was the hearing with Governor Pritzker, other governors. And although you're not on the Oversight Committee, you were allowed to participate in that hearing. I want to talk about that and some other things. A lot of bickering between members of Congress that day and the governors, including Pritzker, who were present. Sort of curious, what was the agenda for the Oversight Committee that day? Did you get any takeaways from it?
Well, I would mention a couple things, Paul. If you go back to the election last November, I think one of the biggest issues in the election and why Donald Trump got elected is illegal immigration, is our border policy, is the unmitigated disaster at our southern border. And so when people think about sanctuary city or sanctuary state policies, there's real concern about why states are not cooperating with the federal government to implement immigration reform. So if you look at that as sort of in conflict, states not abiding by immigration law, yesterday was a way to was a hearing and a mechanism to have three governors that have sanctuary state policies in place to bring them before and ask questions and get answers on why they continue to not work with the federal government to implement immigration law.
You told Governor Pritzker that his policies, and I'm quoting you essentially, were not just misguided, they're dangerous. You mentioned crimes that were committed by undocumented immigrants. You mentioned the victims like George Levin, who was bound, gagged, and killed by an undocumented immigrant, Catherine Abraham, who was killed in a hit-and-run car accident in Urbana, where I went to school out there. But the governor's response to you was Congress isn't doing its job, that if Congress had had immigration reform, these people wouldn't have been here and these things wouldn't have happened. Is he wrong about that?
He is wrong. If you noticed in the hearing yesterday, I brought up those instances of those tragic deaths that happened, and I asked him whether he would reconsider or he has any regrets with the sanctuary city policies. He never answered the question, unfortunately, Paul. He diverted and asked me about Medicaid and why I'm not funding Medicaid, totally separate subject. So I think that said it all. That what we're saying is we don't believe these policies make sense because these migrants, illegal migrants, and many of them with criminal backgrounds are coming to states like Chicago, Illinois, and cities like Chicago because of the sanctuary city policies. They're welcoming. So when I said this makes us more dangerous, it's because of those instances. And it wasn't just Illinois, it was also mentioned in New York and Minnesota, but that highlighted it, and getting a non-response from the governor, I think said it all. He's really doubled down on his policies. What I hoped yesterday, and I said it at the end, Paul, it was kind of sad that the governor had to be there. I wish he didn't have to be there, but Illinois is in a spotlight because of this. How can we find a way to work together? Trump got elected. I know he doesn't like Trump, but let's figure out a way to work together with federal law enforcement, with the state of Illinois, cooperate to get people that shouldn't be in this country, send them back to their country of origin.
And you did indeed tell him that you wished he didn't have to be there. Governor Walz, by the way, mentioned that Minnesota is not a sanctuary state, but he had some of those same questions, perhaps of policies. You also mentioned that under Illinois Pritzker's policies, you said that the state isn't working with ICE and getting in the way of what ICE is trying to do. But the response from Illinois officials and from the governor are, look, when there is a proper warrant, when ICE is acting in a particular legal way, we do assist. We don't get in the way when there are proper warrants and proper steps taken. Do you have evidence that's not true?
Well, if you look at the law that, and I referenced it yesterday, Way Forward Act in Illinois that Governor Pritzker advocated for and signed into law, that puts up roadblocks bureaucratically and otherwise with law enforcement. And that's just not me saying that, Paul. If you talk to members of law enforcement at the local and state level, it's much different than other states that don't have sanctuary city policies in place. Go to, Wisconsin or Indiana, for instance. Those aren't in place. And so there's much more of a coordinated effort when you have an illegal migrant where you can pick them up, send them to a detention center and get them back to their country of origin. That doesn't happen in Illinois because of these policies in place. Look at all of the illegal migrants that are at the Cook County Jail right now that in another state would be being processed and sent back to their country of origin. There is no cooperation and coordination. And what I'm saying and what I mentioned yesterday is let's figure out a way to work together. Unfortunately, the governor doubled down on his policies.
So I'm going to be direct with you on this one, because one of the things you said to the governor was You're deflecting away from my questions. And you said, it's not surprising. I would do the same if I were in your shoes. But here's the truth is I watched it, and I watched every minute of it. It did look like not only Pritzker, but even the other governors, it's like nobody got a word in. I mean, it's the questions would come from various Congress members. They would try to answer. But let me be specific for you. When you would say those things to Pritzker, I was kind of waiting for his answer to see you. And he hardly got a few words out before you'd said, I'm reclaiming my time. I'm whatever. So my question to you is, was this really about having a meaningful interaction with the governor, or everybody's a politician? Was it about making points for the record, for the next election, for whatever, to say, I, as a congressman, I'm just going to have some things I'm going to say?
Well, let's remember, they were invited. They came voluntarily. They weren't subpoenaed. They came voluntarily. So they wanted to be there to defend their policies. And I guess my question, I thought, was very simple. And I teed it up and I had just asked him, when you hear these tragic incidents, do you have any regrets? And it wasn't a yes or no. It wasn't, oh, yes, I'd like to. It was about Medicaid. So it was a totally separate subject about why I don't support Medicaid that had nothing to do with the premise of my question. So I think that set the stage on there. If it would have been, of course, Congressman LaHood, I want to talk to you about how we can work together. Those are tragic incidents. That's not what happened. And so when you get a diversion, and I don't want to comment on how others question other people, I tried to focus on asking a legitimate, serious question about why he continues to double down on sanctuary city policies, and he never answered the question.
Let me ask you kind of a broader question about what ICE is doing. As you know, the mission of the government, of the Trump administration, was we're going to find the criminals, the worst of them, get them out of this country. Pritzker actually said in his opening remarks, I'm fairly sure, if somebody's a criminal, or at least in the early questioning, if somebody's a criminal, I don't want him in Illinois, and I don't want him in the country. So I think pretty much everybody agrees to that. My question for you as a policy matter is, we now know that Stephen Miller had met with officials, kind of said, look, I want 3,000 arrests a day. And then so ICE officials are now showing up at Home Depots and restaurants and places where folks work, churches, schools. They're even showing up at courthouses where the undocumented are showing up for their regularly scheduled hearing. Are you good with that expansion of the policy that's going after somebody who, as far as we can tell, the only thing they did is enter the country illegally, which under the law is seen as a misdemeanor?
Yeah, well, a couple of things on that. I think it would be a much different conversation if we hadn't let in 11 million people illegally over the last 4 years under the Biden administration. Unmitigated disaster at our southern border, Paul. So when you think about, we have these 11 million people here, many of them, we don't know whether they have a criminal history or not. I think that we have to enforce the rule of law. And I appreciate what the president has done, President Trump, on stopping border crossings. But people that are here illegally, they ought to go through the same process. I'm a big supporter of legal immigration, bringing people here legally. I'm the sponsor of a number of pieces of legislation. I'm the strongest advocate for that. People that waited in line, followed the rules, did exactly what we said, come here legally. When you take 11 million people and put them at the head of the line, that's just wrong. So we have to figure out a way to remedy that. That's part of what President Trump is doing. I think just personally, we ought to be focused on getting criminals out of this country. And that's what DHS and ICE is focused on primarily right now. And I support that.
As a brief question, as you know, a lot of them are being sent to prisons in El Salvador, not getting due process rights. Are you good with that? I mean, I thought the theory was people go back to the country they came from, and we're sending them home, essentially. Are you comfortable with the way it's playing out now?
Well, as a former state and federal prosecutor and a lawyer, I believe in due process. I'm glad they, as you saw last week, they brought back the particularly individual from El Salvador to have his due process. I think that was a positive thing. So I give the Trump administration credit on that. There'll be an ebb and flow of judicial rulings on a number of these things. But remember, I go back to what I said before. The federal government is in charge of protecting our borders, making sure people don't come here illegally. We have to use the rule of law to do that. And I think that was the message of the election last year. And that's what President Trump, some people don't like that. And that's part of what yesterday's hearing was all about.